Hey, if your kids are awake right now, there's a pretty good chance they're looking at a screen. I'm Jamie Tucker, coming up with a new study about screen time and children that's a little disturbing.
So how many times during the day, if you have kids, do you see their eyes? How many times are they actually facing you and engaging with you in a conversation? And if you're honest, it's probably not as much, not as often as it used to be because they're always on their screen. So we're talking about a new report that just came out, new research about kids and their screen time post COVID. And joining me is Catherine Price, the author of this great book. I'm going to hold it up, called "How to Break Up with Your Phone." And if I were to add a subtitle, it would be "How to Break Up with Your Phone and Why You Should." Catherine, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks so much for having me.
So you saw this research. It was by the University of California in San Francisco that said, and this is amazing to me, that post COVID, teenagers are spending nearly 8 hours a day staring at a screen. Does that surprise you with the research that you've put together? Does that surprise you at all?
I am really sad to say it doesn't entirely surprise me. What surprises me, what I would like to point out to viewers, is that according to the report, that does not include school-related computer or screen time. That's recreational screen time. It's also self-reported, which is, that always should raise flags about how accurate it is. But even if it's a rough ballpark, if you think about 8 hours a day on your screens, that's about a half of your waking life. And if you add in the amount of time people are spending on screens for school, first of all, the math doesn't make sense because there aren't that many hours in a day. But to me, that becomes truly concerning because that is most of our life. And it's true for adults too, by the way. We shouldn't just blame teenagers. We're all spending a lot of time on screens.
So I think most parents would agree that staring at a screen for even half of that time, even 4 hours a day, and by screens, let's define that. That is a smartphone screen, a tablet screen, a television for playing games or watching streaming video. But I think most parents would agree even 4 hours a day is entirely too long. But we agree with that. But maybe we don't actually get some idea in our head of why that is bad. Why is that bad? Why and how does hours staring at a screen, why is that bad for kids?
Let me clarify first. I'm not a Luddite and I'm not anti-technology. Obviously, we're talking through a screen and it's quite convenient to be able to do this from the comfort of my living room on short notice, right? But there's a number of reasons I think we should be concerned. And one of the primary ones is opportunity cost. There's only 24 hours in a day. We're supposed to be spending at least 8 of those asleep. So every minute we're spending on one thing is a minute we're not spending on something else, and we're not getting that back. So if we're talking about whether it's 4 hours a day or 8 hours a day, that's a lot of time that we're spending on one thing. And I would argue that we should be very mindful and intentional about what we're doing to make sure we actually want it to be a good use of our time. So there's that kind of philosophical, what's the purpose of life kind of message there. But if you actually look at the research in terms of what kinds of effects the things that we do on our screens is having on us, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned in terms of the effects that the way we interact with our screens and devices are having on our ability to focus and concentrate, on our productivity, on our creativity, on our ability to remember things, on our self-esteem and mental health, and on our sleep, which in turn can really impact our physical health, both in the short and the long term. And there's also interesting to me, but disturbing in general research coming out, especially recently, about effects that I personally hadn't even thought about, like nearsightedness among kids, which actually has spiked quite dramatically during the pandemic. And while correlation isn't causation, it's pretty interesting that that's a time in which we are spending more time than ever looking at our devices at short distance from our face. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. It's a real issue for adults and kids alike. And I would also say relationships is something we don't pay enough attention to, but we really are damaging our in-person relationships with the people we supposedly care about by constantly having our attention divided between real life and whatever we're doing on our phones.
And you mentioned, and I do want to stress, we're talking about kids, teenagers, and younger on their devices for 8 hours a day, but it also, as you well know from your research, adults are just as guilty.
Yes. Yes. And if you do the math, I mean, again, I'm just finding ways to point out that this is a third of your life or a half of your waking life, but it adds up to 120 full days a year if you do the math on what it would be if you did 8 hours a day. That's nuts. And if you do that, I'm doing my own calculations based on 4 hours a week. This actually amounts to 72 40-hour work weeks. If you're spending 8 hours a day on your phones or your devices, that's crazy. Where are we finding this time? And then all of us adults and kids alike say we don't have time to do the other things that we care about. Well, guys, we do have the time. We're just currently spending it on our devices. And I'd also like to make the point that every minute we're spending on one of those devices, because in the vast majority of cases, what we're doing is looking at an attention sucking app such as social media or something that's advertising based. Every minute we're spending on one of those apps is essentially a minute we are spending making money for someone else, namely the executives of social media and tech companies. If you want to be doing that, go for it. Mark Zuckerberg would appreciate it. But I would argue that most of us don't actually want to be trading our time and attention for someone else's bottom line.
I wonder what your thoughts are. When I was a kid, I got bored quite a lot. And I thought, and looking back now, I think boredom helped my creativity, my thinking. Kids aren't bored today. How important is just simply being bored and letting your mind wander? We call it daydreaming. How important is that?
It's hugely important, not just for kids, but adults as well. And we don't give ourselves, any of us, give ourselves a chance. Boredom has been eliminated. That's like an extinct species.
Yeah.
And I would argue that we should try to get it back, because if you think about it, if you're constantly subjecting your brain to an onslaught of new information, you're always in reactivity and processing, that you're processing and reacting to things. You're not giving yourself the space to actually come up with new independent thoughts. And you're also probably not internalizing and absorbing a lot of the information that you're getting, which, by the way, varies widely in terms of its quality. And that's very important, because if you think about what an insight is, which I would argue is the ability to see a connection between two seemingly unconnected things, you need to have a lot of raw material in your brain. Essentially, it would be like trying to cook something when your pantry is bare. You need to have stuff in your pantry to make something interesting for dinner. If you want to have an interesting insight or thought, you also need a lot of material in your brain. Well, if you're constantly on intake mode and you're not actually internalizing the stuff that you're just dealing with, you're not going to have much stuff in your brain to begin with. And therefore, you're not going to be able to come up with insights on your own. And if you think about it, it makes total sense for those of us old enough to remember having breaks from technology. Many of our most creative thoughts come while we're in the shower, or formerly while we were on walks, but now we're all texting and listening to podcasts. And that is in part because it's one of the few times in our days where we allow our brains to wander, to go where they want to go. And that's when insights and creativity happen. So I think that we really are losing a lot. It's not really easy to quantify by never giving our brains a break. And it actually saddens me and concerns me greatly to think about all the thoughts and insights and creative projects that will not happen because we are not giving ourselves space. And again, that's true not just for teenagers, but also for adults.
Yeah. And in your book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, you're not talking specifically about any age group, but parents have, it's difficult, I think, for parents to say, don't stay on your device that long. You're spending too much time looking at your phone, and then pick up the phone themselves and get on Facebook or whatever and just consume the digital content. How important is it, do you think, for parents in order to encourage your kids to not spend so much time on their phone, to not spend so much time on their phone?
I think it's enormously important. We are huge hypocrites, and we need to actually act in the way that we want our kids to emulate. So if you're trying to tell your kid to not be on their phone so much and you're checking Twitter under the table at dinner, well, guess what? That's not going to work. But I'd also say that I don't think that our goal should be just to spend less time on our phones in a kind of restrictive sense. It should be to spend more time on our lives and to define what that means, what is actually important to us, and then align our behaviors with our supposed priorities. And so I would say that instead of finger wagging at your kids, I would suggest having a full family conversation. And by the way, this is applicable even if your kids are as young as 5 or 6. Like my daughter's 6, and I think that it would be very interesting to ask her this question, to ask your own kids, what do they think about your relationship with technology? And then also to talk about it not in terms of trying to cut back on screen time for the, just for the sake of a number goal, but instead saying, why are we spending so much time on these things? Are we actually getting value from it? Ask your kids and yourself how much you really know about the business models behind our most time-sucking apps. Because in reality, there's very sophisticated techniques being used to get us to frankly be hooked to our
Yeah.
devices. They're the exact same tricks that are used to manipulate people into staying put in front of a slot machine, which should be concerning because slot machines are widely considered to be the most addictive machines ever to have been invented. I think the more that we can emphasize the way that we're being manipulated and taken advantage of, the more motivated we will be to change our behavior, not out of a sense of arbitrary self-restriction, but because we're angry about it. No one should be able to do that to us. We should be able to live our own lives.
People know, and again, we know deep down, staring at a screen all day cannot be good on so many different levels. However, trying to cut back, and this is the focus of your first book, trying to cut back is difficult these days. How do we set those boundaries? How do we encourage ourselves, our kids, to spend less time on the screen? Because it is difficult.
First, I would say is to educate yourself about what's happening and why it's so difficult to look away. And that's definitely what I do in How to Break Up with Your Phone. The first half is a description of what techniques are being used against us and then what effects this is having on us. And honestly, I've gotten even more concerned since that book came out in 2018, which I thought was impossible, but I actually am. So you want to have a sense of what you're up against. You also might want to Google some of the talks by Sean Parker and this other man who's the former president of user growth at Facebook, Chamath Palihapitiya. I always say his name wrong. I
Yeah,
apologize.
that's all
Anyway,
right.
truly shocking comments on the part of some of the executives at the companies that we're giving our time and attention to. Then the next, I would encourage you to actually focus on your own priorities to identify what's important to you in life. That's actually the focus of my new book, which is The Power of Fun, which is that you can use a self-inquiry into what you find fun as a way to figure out how you want to spend your leisure time and get actual enjoyment and satisfaction and pleasure out of it. And I say that because I think you have to have a positive goal in mind before you try to make these changes. And then I would say the next step is to become aware of your own habits when it comes to our phones,
Mm.
because many of us are on such autopilot that we don't even notice our phones in our hands until 30 minutes have passed, and we look up and wonder what just happened to that last half hour of our lives. So one way to do that is to simply put a rubber band or a hair tie around your phone
Yeah.
for a couple of days so that when you pick it up and you encounter this physical impediment and you wonder for a split second, why is there a rubber band on my phone? You're encouraged to notice that you picked it up. And then the next step I would encourage you to do is to go through this mindfulness inspired exercise I created called WWW, which is short for what for, why now, and what else, as a way to become more intentional. And the way that works is you simply ask yourself, what for? What did I pick up my phone for right now? What's my purpose? Did I even have a purpose? Then you ask yourself, why now? Was there actually a time related purpose? Like you needed to make a particular phone call or you needed to send an email right now? Or was there an emotional reason, which is more common? Something like I was bored and I wanted a distraction, or I was lonely and I wanted a connection. Because once you have that sense of why you picked up your phone and what reward your brain is after, you can then move on to the third step, which is what else? So what else could you do to achieve the same result? And in some cases, you might be able to swap in a different activity. Say you're lonely and you realize, oh, I could actually talk to the person who's near me in real life, or actually call a friend instead of looking at social media. If you need a distraction, maybe take a short walk, something like that. And then you can also decide you actually would like to do just nothing, right? There's going back to the conversation about boredom, just have a few minutes of letting your brain wander. It might be uncomfortable, but you might end up looking forward to those moments. And then lastly, you might conclude that you truly do want to be on your phone in that moment. And that's totally fine because now you're doing it consciously and you actually want to be doing it. And that's our point, is intentionality. And then I can also give some suggestions in terms of practical things you can do to create boundaries both on and off your phone once you have that philosophical framework and that self-awareness in place. And some of those would be to establish a charging station that's not in your bedroom,
Yeah.
because you're guaranteeing, if your phone is your alarm clock and it's in your bedroom, that you're going to interact with it first thing in the morning because you have to touch it to turn off the alarm. So get a standalone alarm clock. I'd also recommend creating no phone zones for yourself, such as the bedroom and the dining room table. And dare I say it, the bathroom. Just notice how weird that feels. That's crazy, guys. And
You're
then I would
right.
also recommend that you do things to your actual phone. Like you probably, if you're like most people, have a random assortment of apps on your home screen that got there either because they came with the phone or because they were installed, they're appearing in whatever order you installed them.
Yeah.
Well, that's not great because chances are you have some of your most tempting apps on your home screen.
Yeah.
And I like to always say that our phones should be tools, not temptations. And the best way to do that is to look through your home screen and your phone in general, and ideally delete time sucking apps, but at very least get them onto a different page so that your home screen only contains tools that are serve a practical purpose, like your banking app. Whoever gets sucked into Google Maps, nobody gets sucked into that. Or that support a habit you're trying to establish. Like I have a meditation app on my homepage and a guitar tuning app because I actually want to do those things and they support a positive habit. And then always just remember, if you do delete an app, social media, email, the news, games, and shopping are the biggest categories of the problematic
Okay.
apps, the slot machine apps, as I call them. Doesn't mean you can't use them. Either do it from a desktop or reinstall them on your phone when you actually want to use them and then delete them afterwards. I call that an on again, off again relationship. And it's a great way to feel, again, that you're not restricting yourself per se. You're just helping yourself become more intentional and making sure that you're not vulnerable to the manipulative tactics of these companies that are making money by stealing our lives from us, literally from underneath our noses.
Your new book, Fun, and what is the subtitle of Fun?
Oh, it's The Power of Fun, How to Feel Alive Again.
So that comes out later in December, and
December
I'm
21st.
I'm guessing that just judging from the title, since I haven't had a chance to read this, that it also talks about replacing some of that time with fun activities, fun things, and that seems to really be perfect when you're talking about kids on their devices.
That is exactly what the book's about. So the power of fun, how to feel alive again. The website is howtohavefun.com. So I'm getting
Okay,
confused.
all right.
The book is the direct result of my own process of breaking up with my own phone, which means creating a healthier relationship with it, and then realizing I had all this reclaimed time. Because again, we're spending so much time on our devices doing things that in many cases are ultimately meaningless. So I actually had a freak out moment when I realized, oh my goodness, I now have hours more in my day. I don't know what I want to do with that. I like to think I'm an interesting and interested person, but
Yeah.
I had lost sight of my real life interests and my passions and my things I wanted to do and learn for myself. So I asked myself, what's something I say I want to do, but supposedly don't have time for? And my answer to that question was, well, I always say I want to learn how to play guitar. You know, I had a guitar. My grandmother gave me money to buy it when I was in college. She played guitar. I was extremely close with her. I play piano, so I have a musical background.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say, I ended up signing up for an adult group guitar class, and I ended up coming away from these classes with a sense of energy and excitement and buoyancy that I hadn't felt in a long time. And the more I thought of it, the more I realized I know what this feeling is. It's fun. I'm having fun. And
Yeah.
it's not because of the skill I'm learning. That's great, but there's something bigger going on. And I came to conclude that that bigger thing is what I call true fun, which is to say the confluence of three states: playfulness, like a sense of lightheartedness and not having a goal in mind; connection, so feeling a sense of connection, in this case with other human beings; and flow, which is the psychological state of being totally engrossed in whatever you're doing and engaged. And I realized that that true fun, as I called it, stands in total contrast to what I now call fake fun, which is what we often encounter and experience when we do things on our phones. Social media is marketed to us as, quote, fun, but in reality, it often leaves us feeling empty and just vacant and kind of gross about ourselves.
Yeah.
All that is to say, this new book is all about how I explored the concept of fun, which really hasn't been studied because there hadn't been a good definition of it. And how I explored the concept of it, how I applied it to my own life, how I used it to replace the time I'd been spending on screens. And then the second half of the book is a whole plan for how to have more of it. And the one of the many things I was just blown away by, I'm just so excited about this book, but also really surprised by just what I found out myself, is that many of the negative effects of screen time stand in direct contrast to the positive effects of fun when you define it as playfulness, connection, and flow. All three of those states are enormously good for our mental health and our physical health in ways that are the opposite of what happens when we lose ourselves in passive pursuits on our screens. And so I've become convinced that true fun has the power to change our lives for the better. And I do think it's an amazing tool for families to employ, because when people are having fun together, they're happy and they're engaged and they're present and they're connected. And I've also found that the more true fun you're having, the less susceptible you are to the siren song of your screens, because you don't actually want to be doing it anymore. If you contrast the feeling you get from having true fun to the feeling you get from scrolling through other people's feeds on Instagram, there's no question which one is going to be the better choice.
Right.
So the more true fun we have, the less work we'll have to put into reducing our screen time, because it will just reduce on its own.
Fascinating. You've given us a lot to think about. Self-evaluation. We're talking a lot about kids, but the self-evaluation, I take a lot away from that because it's true. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you will never reach the end of the news feed. Never reach the end. For days, you can scroll, and that's what they want us to do. So, Catherine, thank you very much for your insight. The books, How to Break Up with Your Phone and The Power of Fun. Power of Fun comes out December 20. Did you say the 21st?
Yep, December 21st.
Okay,
And
just
there's
in time
apparently
for
a global paper shortage. So if anyone wants a copy for the holidays, which I encourage because it's fun to go through together, please order it now. Because one of my nightmares as an author is that people will want to buy this book and there
Right.
won't be any paper to print it on. So apparently pre-orders are really helpful in making sure there are adequate copies. And people can learn more about it at howtohavefun.com, and also screenlifebalance.com is my site where I offer lots of resources for how to achieve a better, healthier relationship with technology.
All right. And I know they're both available on Kindle, but that's
Yes.
that's a positive thing. That's a positive
Yes.
way to use your devices. So, Catherine, thank you again for your insight, your books, and for taking the time to be with us. And best of luck as you go through. I can't wait for book number 3.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on.
All right, Catherine. That's Catherine Price, everyone. Thanks again, Catherine. And that's what the technology for normal people for today. Join us again next time where we're going to actually talk about some of the positive sides of your devices. Thanks, folks. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later.